Picture this. You're stepping into the glittering chambers of Elizabethan England. The air is heavy with incense and the faint sweetness of rosewater. Gold-threaded tapestries hang thick against the cold stone walls, capturing candlelight in shimmering bursts. Courtiers whisper in measured tones. The click of shoe heels on flagstones punctuates the uneasy hush. At first, the scene feels immaculate, perfectly staged, spotless, the very image of a radiant queenly court. But then your senses adjust. Beneath the perfume, something sour lingers. The tapestries are heavy not only with gold but with dust. The silk gloves worn by noble ladies conceal the fact that water rarely touches their hands. The very room smells both intoxicating and faintly rancid, as if its splendor itself has been painted over something less glamorous. And at the heart of this world sits Elizabeth Tudor, Elizabeth I, the legendary Virgin Queen. To her devoted subjects, she was brilliance incarnate, the woman who shepherded England into a golden age of theatre, exploration, and power. Her portraiture shows her flawless, almost otherworldly, with alabaster skin, flowing gowns, and jewels that caught the light like divine fire. She was meant to embody purity, majesty, and immortality. But Elizabeth carried another truth, one whispered in corridors, murmured in foreign courts, and joked about in the privacy of diaries. For all her regal brilliance, she held a peculiar and guarded reputation about cleanliness. To some, she was radiant. To others, she was perfumed to mask the realities of Elizabethan hygiene. Her court was a place where bathing was feared as dangerous, where perfumes were medicine, and where linen shifts were scrubbed in place of skin. Behind the perfect face painted in layers of white lead, behind the gown that sparkled with cloth of gold, lurked very human anxieties about disease, decay, and the limits of medical knowledge. Elizabeth's supposed cleaning habits weren't simply the quirks of a queen. They were acts of survival and theatre rolled into one. Every scented glove, every ritual wipe with a cloth, every carefully staged veil of perfume was a blending of medical fare, political performance, and personal image crafting. What the public never saw, what history books flatten into anecdotes, is that cleanliness under Elizabeth wasn't mere hygiene. It was propaganda. It was medicine. It was a veil behind which one of the greatest rulers of Europe kept her human frailty hidden. And today, as we step back into those dust-laden chambers, we will uncover what those habits really meant. Not just for Elizabeth's body, but for the body politic of her entire realm. Because the Virgin Queen's greatest secret may not have been her lack of a husband. It may have been that her immaculate image was preserved not with soap and water, but with scent, illusion, and silence. Before we dive further into the hidden world of Elizabeth I's unusual cleaning rituals, let me pause for a quick moment. If you enjoy peeling back the forgotten and sometimes unsettling secrets behind history's most famous figures, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. For most of us, Elizabeth I lives in portraits. The radiant face framed by a collar of lace, the ivory skin powdered to perfection, the hair blazed with jewels. Every brushstroke painted her not just as a woman, but as a legend, the Virgin Queen who reigned for nearly half a century, seemingly unchanging, immortal, untouchable. She wanted us to remember her this way. Elizabeth weaponized image long before modern media. She understood that her body was a body politic, and that to keep England stable, her own visage needed to be immaculate. Her court artists didn't simply capture her appearance. They curated her into an icon. Lines vanished, blemishes dissolved, even age itself refused to appear. Elizabeth of the portraits wasn't a mortal ruler. She was a goddess in cloth of gold. But myths are always fragile. The real Elizabeth, the woman behind the portraits, struggled with the same human anxieties as everyone else. Beneath the powdered layers of white lead, her skin cracked and aged. The heavy wigs and elaborate gowns that dazzled foreign ambassadors were also designed to hide thinning hair, to mask the toll taken by stress and sickness. And then there were her cleaning habits, the untold rituals that gave whispering courtiers ammunition for rumor. Elizabeth was admired for her brilliance, but notorious for bathing rarely. Chroniclers mentioned, with a strange mixture of respect and discomfort, that she bathed once a month, whether she needed it or not. What one age saw as normal hygiene, another age now called peculiar, even unhygienic. Yet this was no simple oversight. Hygiene was not just about health in the 16th century. It was about medicine, reputation, and politics. The fewer times Elizabeth was seen washed, the more austere and untouchable she appeared. Perfumes, scented gloves, and linen rubbing became a version of cleanliness, an approach that reassured her doctors, maintained her image, and mystified her subjects. This fragile balance between myth and mortality, between glamour and grime, shaped her reign as surely as laws or battles. Elizabeth's image was not just about beauty. It was about control. And to understand how profound this really was, we need to look at Elizabethan hygiene itself, a world where doctors feared hot water, where perfume was medicine, and where royalty fought a constant battle not against doubt, but against perception. Modern ideas of hygiene, daily showers, scented soaps, sparkling white teeth, simply didn't exist. In Elizabeth's world, doctors warned that too much water was dangerous. They believed that hot water opened the pores, allowing disease to creep inside the body. Bathing wasn't a path to health. It was a risk. Instead, cleanliness was reimagined into rituals that seem strange, even backwards, to us today. For Elizabethans, cleaning didn't mean soap and scrubbing. It meant friction. People wiped themselves down with cloths of fine linen, believing the fabric itself absorbed dirt and disease. Changing your underclothes, especially your linen shift, was thought to be as good as a wash. To them, fresh fabric on skin equals fresh body. Elizabeth herself relied on this practice. Cortes described a linen wardrobe as elaborate and near endless. Her daily cleanliness was often measured by how frequently shifts, sheets, and gowns were changed, not by how often water touched the body. In a world where public streets doubled as open sores, smell was more than an inconvenience. It was feared as dangerous. The theory of miasma, that foul air spread plague and sickness, dominated medical thought. And so the nobility armed themselves against scent. They wore pomanders, small metal orbs filled with herbs and resins, dangled from belts or rosaries. Gloves were soaked in musk or rose oil, rooms clouded with incense. Elizabeth took these practices even further. Her love of perfumes was legendary. Accounts record her using scented waters to anoint her hands, her rooms, even her clothing. Her chambers would have been an overwhelming haze of rose, lavender, civet, and ambergris. To Elizabeth, bathing in fragrance was safer than bathing in water. She wasn't just masking odor. She was battling death itself, with perfume as her armor. Even oral hygiene followed the same principle: cover, don't cleanse. Powdered herbs, cloth rubs with vinegar, or even honey were used to clean teeth. But real dental health was poor. Elizabeth herself was mocked later in life for blackened teeth, a byproduct of the New World sugar that flooded England's court. Her skin fared no better. Instead of soap and water, she relied on cosmetics, thick layers of white lead paint and rouge. When it faded or cracked, she simply reapplied. The face of the Virgin Queen was not scrubbed, but laid, like a canvas repainted again and again. This was Elizabethan hygiene: mask rather than remove, conceal rather than cleanse. Linen instead of water, perfume instead of scrubbing, paint instead of bare skin. Elizabeth wasn't unusual for living this way. What made her unique was how she amplified it. Where others wore small pomanders at their waist, Elizabeth soaked whole rooms. Where nobles changed linen weekly, she demanded fresh layers constantly. And where most aristocrats painted their faces occasionally, Elizabeth transformed cosmetics into a public myth of eternal youth and purity. She wasn't simply a participant in Elizabethan hygiene. She was its perfection and its prison. And in that contradiction, hiding germs by hiding herself, lies the real secret of her cleaning rituals. Because, as we'll see, for Elizabeth, cleanliness wasn't just about disease. It was about image, politics, and control. If ordinary nobles treated water with suspicion, then Elizabeth herself elevated that suspicion into routine. Contemporary accounts suggest that the great Virgin Queen bathed only once a month, whether she needed it or not. To modern ears, it sounds unthinkable. Yet to Elizabeth physicians, water was risky, even dangerous. Immersion could invite fevers or weaken the body. Once a month was ample, more than enough. But Elizabeth did not trust water to keep her aura untarnished. She turned instead to ritual. Elizabeth's chambers were famously soaked in fragrance. Visitors spoke of the hazy air in her private apartments, heavy with rosewater, violet, musk, and exotic scents imported from as far away as the Ottoman Empire. Her gloves, according to court records, were steeped in perfumed oils, her sheets sprinkled with flowered water, her very body anointed daily. Where most ladies carried pomanders at their waist, Elizabeth turned perfume into a weapon. Ambassadors would leave her presence reeking of civet and amber. To her faithful courtiers, this was no inconvenience. It was majesty. She wasn't simply fragrant. She was untouchable. Elizabeth wasn't just a virgin queen. She was a perfumed queen, masking a court terrified of dirt. Her face, so immortalized in portraits, was a canvas carefully maintained not by cleansing, but by layering. Elizabeth coated her complexion in heavy makeup, most notoriously white lead paste mixed with vinegar, which bleached the skin to an almost ethereal pallor. On top of this came rouge for the cheeks, vermilion for the lips, powders to soften imperfections. And here's the crucial detail. She seldom removed it fully. Instead, cracks or discolorations were covered by more. Morning by morning, layer upon layer built up until her face became less her own and more an icon, a moving fresco of royal legitimacy, carefully painted over itself each day. This was cleaning by concealment. She was not washing dirt away. She was painting purity on top of it. If the queen herself was perfumed and painted, her chambers bore the evidence of what was hidden. Servants, in their letters and diaries, remarked on the constant battle against odor. Scented herbs were laid across floors, rushes mixed with rosemary and lavender. Fires were kept burning to drive away the perceived danger of bad air. The heavy drapery and tapestries were sprayed or fumed with sweet waters in a futile war against dampness and decay. Elizabeth lived in rooms more like apothecaries than dwellings, every surface masking another scent. Every breath filled less with fresh air than with layers of perfume and smoke. The physical cleanliness may not have matched the illusion, but the illusion mattered more. To Elizabeth, cleaning was never about soap and water. It was about performance. Where other rulers might scrub, Elizabeth wiped. Where others might wash, she concealed. And in this inversion, she curated not only her own image, but the image of England itself, a radiant, scented queen who seemed immune to the grime of everyday life, the decay of age, even the ordinariness of flesh. She wasn't striving for cleanliness. She was striving for eternity. These personal habits, monthly baths, perfumes that overwhelm the senses, paints and powders never strip away, rooms suffocated by incense, gave Elizabeth her timeless aura. But they also reveal something deeper. For her, hygiene was politics in disguise, because what Elizabeth washed away with water might fade in a day. What she masked with perfume and paint, however, could last a lifetime in memory. And in her world, memory was power. In a world where queens were judged as much by their bodies as by their crowns, Elizabeth understood that her image had to symbolize more than majesty. It had to embody purity itself. She styled herself as a virgin queen, untouched, incorruptible, almost saint-like, and her cleaning rituals became a language that reinforced this image. Washing too often in Elizabethan imagination seemed indulgent, even worldly, but not washing, covering oneself instead with perfumes and powders, could be reframed as sacred austerity, holiness through restraint, cleanliness by denial. Each time Elizabeth limited her baths, each time she masked herself in fragrance rather than water, she subtly fed the persona of a woman who was beyond fleshly appetites, a ruler consecrated to God and country rather than to sensuality. Perfumes were not merely pleasant. They symbolized both sanctity and control. To wear gloves bathed in rose oil, to walk through chambers steeped in incense. This was to command one's physical presence like a religious relic. Courtiers might carry pomanders discreetly at their belts. Elizabeth turned hers into an aura, a scented barrier that declared not only beauty, but distance. Her fragrance proclaimed her untouchability. You might smell her long before you reached her throne, but you could never truly reach her. She was not another human body in a room. She was England itself, perfumed and elevated. The very act of cleaning her body, wiping with cloths, sprinkling rose water, layering makeup, was transformed into ritual theater. Each detail was less about removing dirt than about announcing, "I am unspoiled." Even filth had meaning in this balancing act. To ordinary people, dirt was inescapable. To nobles, it was disguisable. But to Elizabeth, it was political. She couldn't be seen struggling against grime like anyone else. Instead, she had to embody incorruptibility by hiding flaws with cosmetics, by surrounding herself with perfume clouds. She insisted that she alone, unlike her subjects, was beyond ordinary decay. This wasn't simply vanity. It was stability. England in the 16th century was a kingdom still haunted by civil wars, rebellion, and religious fracture. If Elizabeth's very body could serve as theater for purity and divine appointment, then her rule itself seemed sanctioned, untouchable, unimpeachable. Elizabeth wasn't just a virgin queen. She was the immaculate queen whose very cleaning rituals were treated as extensions of her crown. Her lack of bathing became spiritual austerity. Her perfumes, political medicine. Her painted face, a symbol of polished continuity. And so, one of the strangest paradoxes of her reign emerges. Elizabeth could remain unwashed, even concealed beneath powders and perfumes, and yet be remembered as England's most radiant monarch. Because in her world, dirt and cleanliness weren't about hygiene. They were about theater, and theater was power. To truly understand Elizabeth's hygiene rituals, we have to step into the mindset of Tudor medicine, a world where humors, not germs, explain disease, and where doctors wielded astrology with the same seriousness as anatomy. In the 16th century, bathing wasn't purity, it was peril. Physicians taught that too much heat or moisture could unbalance the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When pores opened during hot baths, bad air was believed to slip inside, weakening the core. Elizabeth's physicians repeated this advice with great authority. A warm bath too often, they warned, might invite fever, plague, or even moral weakness. And so they prescribed moderation. Dry, cleansing was praised as safer and more refined. Elizabeth's habit of bathing once a month conformed not to laziness, but to expert opinion. Doctors recommended replacing water with linen. The gentle friction of cloth against skin, they argued, absorbed excess oils, drew away impurities, and stimulated blood circulation. For the queen, this wasn't eccentricity but careful regimen. Changing her shifts and linens frequently was a way of keeping balance, maintaining humoral health without the risk of immersion. Even perfumes were medical, not merely cosmetic. The reign of Elizabeth was shadowed by plague outbreaks, and nearly everyone feared miasma, the idea that evil smells carried disease. Perfumes, herbs, and scented gloves became a defense. Physicians approved the practice of carrying pomanders, ornate spheres stuffed with spices, resins, and ambergris. Breathing in the sweet herbs was thought to cleanse the air before it touched the lungs. Elizabeth's obsession with perfume, then, was as much about fear of sickness as it was about allure. To enter her chambers, hazy with incense and scented smoke, was almost like stepping into a quarantine zone fortified by fragrance. From our modern perspective, Elizabeth's cleaning habits can look eccentric, even unhealthy. But from hers, they were the pinnacle of medical wisdom. To wash sparingly, to cleanse with linen, to mask odors with perfume. This was not rebellion against science, but obedience to it. She wasn't eccentric at all. She was doing exactly what her doctors told her. And this is the paradox. The Virgin Queen wasn't just masking dirt with perfume out of vanity. She was protecting her body, her reign, and perhaps even her kingdom, with the science of her age. Elizabeth's cleaning rituals might have been shaped by medicine and politics, but they didn't exist in a vacuum. The courtiers who surrounded her every day, the ambassadors, the ladies-in-waiting, the noble rivals, all observed them, and they had plenty to say. Fragments of diaries and letters from the Elizabethan court make sly references to the Queen's careful routines. Visitors noted the overwhelming scent of her presence, sometimes describing her chamber as sweet beyond measure, other times with sharper edge, a cloud of perfumes masking a body never bathed. Her long reliance on cosmetics also drew curiosity. Ambassadors writing back to their rulers often remarked on how young she appeared, a diplomatic way of noting that Elizabeth's painted mask concealed the realities of age. To her allies, she was ageless. To her rivals, she was obviously made up a spectacle of concealment. And yet, for all the teasing, her courtiers copied her. When the queen set a trend, the court obeyed. Perfumed gloves, once an eccentricity, became a must-have for nobles of both genders. Pomanders grew ornate, their filigreed spheres dangling from belts and chains. To be close to Elizabeth was to reek, gloriously, of musk and amber, and aristocrats craved that association. Her face paints, too, became a marker of fashion. Women emulated the pale, powdered look, even if it meant risking their own skin to the poisonous white lead. If Elizabeth was an icon, even her concealments had to be imitated. The Queen's cleaning habits transformed into court fashion. Still, imitation did not silence mockery. Gossip flowed as freely as perfume. Some courtiers joke about the Queen's layers of paint, saying her face looked drawn by nature, finished by artifice. Others, less charitable, whispered that she was too polished, an actor on perpetual stage, her cleanliness less a truth than a mask. Foreign visitors sometimes laughed more openly. A Venetian envoy once described her magnificence as majestic, if viewed from afar. The implication was obvious. Distance concealed flaws that proximity might reveal. This was a paradox of Elizabeth's cleaning rituals. To some, they signified majesty, refinement, and purity. To others, they reeked of artifice, a gilded surface covering something more ordinary underneath. Her court copied her perfumes, yet whispered about the smell. They admired her painted face, yet joked about its thickness. She was both role model and caricature, admired yet mocked, imitated yet doubted. Elizabeth herself likely knew this. She didn't strive to avoid gossip. She fed it, using her image like bait and weapon. If her cleaning left her looking too polished, that was the point. She wasn't aiming for authenticity. She was aiming for unforgettable. Because in Elizabeth's court, even dirt and perfume became politics. Step back for a moment. Think of the Elizabeth we know best, the sovereign immortalized in her portraits. A face pale as ivory, a halo of auburn hair adorned with pearls, gowns gleaming like molten gold. Yet behind that luminous icon was a daily routine built not on soap and water, but on perfumes, powders, and paints. Her radiance was not polished. It was constructed, and that construction became her most powerful weapon. Elizabeth's cleaning habits were never just private quirks. They were public theater stage before her entire kingdom. Each time she wiped her body with linen rather than scrub with water, it wasn't simple laziness. It was austerity, a ritual denial of ordinary human needs. Her refusal to bathe frequently echoed her refusal to wed. Both choices framed her as different, elevated, untouchable. Her perfume-drenched gloves, her heavily scented chambers, her powders and paints, all of it dramatized purity, virginity, and divine selection. Elizabeth wasn't just keeping herself clean. She was rewriting what it meant to be clean. Clean wasn't about flesh. It was about image. And Elizabeth's image became immaculate, even when her chambers harbored stale incense and tapestries held dust. There is irony here. Beneath the white lead makeup, her skin may have cracked. Beneath the powders and perfumes, her body must have aged, sweated, faltered. She wasn't perfect. She was profoundly human. Yet it was precisely in hiding those flaws, in concealing them beneath new layers each morning, that she created her myth, the virgin queen who never aged, the monarch who reigned more than 4 decades without dent to her authority, the ruler who stood radiant at Tilbury, declaring she had the heart and stomach of a king. In this way, Elizabeth's hygiene embodied her reign itself. Conceal weakness, emphasize majesty, overwhelm with spectacle, wash with fragrance, not water, erase with powder, not cloth, appear unchanging, even while years accumulated behind the painted mask. So what was the truth? Did Elizabeth's perfumes and paints hide decay, the reality of a body eroded by time, disease, and cosmetics, or did those very habits become her secret to longevity? By controlling her image so fiercely, did she in fact create the aura that kept challengers at bay, subject enthralled, and England bound together under her rule? The answer may never be clear. But one thing is certain. Elizabeth's cleaning habits, far from trivial eccentricities, became tools of survival, weapons of statecraft. They made her not only memorable, but mythic. And in the end, perhaps that is the untold truth. Elizabeth wasn't simply clean or dirty. She was unforgettable. Elizabeth I has always been remembered as a queen of legends, the Virgin Queen, Glorious Gloriana, the ruler who stood against Spain, inspired Shakespeare, and presided over England's golden age. But buried inside that bright tapestry is a detail most forget. She curated not only her image of virginity and majesty, but her very cleanliness, transforming private rituals into royal propaganda. Her habits might seem bizarre to us now. A bath only once a month, layers of white lead never fully scrubbed away, gloves dripping with musk, chambers thick with incense. But in her age, these were not accidents, nor eccentric whims. They were the product of medicine, mythology, and survival. Washing less was prudence. Perfume was medicine. Paint was armor. Each layer of scent and powder turned her body into an icon, her cleanliness into a performance. What looks to us like avoidance of water was, to Elizabeth, an assertion of control. She dictated how others perceived her. She wasn't vulnerable to ordinary sweat and dirt. She was above it, or at least, she convinced her subjects she was. And in a fragile kingdom haunted by succession crises and religious wars, that was not simply hygiene. It was politics. Elizabeth wasn't simply the Virgin Queen. She was the queen who turned even bathing into an act of political power. She reminded her people that she was uncorrupted, unchanging, immaculate, even if that meant layers of paste and perfume doing the work of water. And perhaps that is the true untold truth of her cleaning habits. They reveal just how far she was willing to go to preserve her illusion, her mask, her myth. They remind us that history's icons are not only larger than life, but strangely human, carrying quirks, fears, and secrets that still fascinate centuries later. Because in the end, Elizabeth's greatest legacy is not just the empire she left behind, but the unforgettable image she crafted morning after morning, with cloth instead of soap, perfume instead of water, and myth instead of reality.